Welcome to the Platform to Perform podcast, the podcast for athletes, coaches, and anyone looking to perform at their highest level. If performance is your goal, we aim to provide you with a platform to perform. I'm your host as always, Todd Davidson, and on episode 36 of the Platform to Perform podcast, I'm delighted to welcome owner of SHP Fitness, Tom Smith. How are you doing today, Tom?
Hi, Todd. Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on podcast debut. So hopefully I don't waffle on too long and can give some good insights.
I'm excited for this. To kick things off, same way I kick all the other podcasts off. Why do you do what you do, and how has it influenced what you're doing now?
Well, I mean, obviously it's my job, so that's number one. But I absolutely, it's definitely a passion side of things. I had, before moving into S&C, I had roles that weren't in sport at all, and I just wasn't enjoying doing them. And then rediscovered the love for sport and training and fitness, etc. And then got into strength and conditioning, and then all about trying to help people achieve, I guess, the goals that I didn't achieve in my life. So I wanted to, the dreams of being a professional athlete, and now hopefully I can help kids develop and maybe help them achieve those goals.
Yeah, we're all failed athletes, aren't we?
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. That's a reoccurring on a podcast.
And so how did you, I've seen a lot of your work with your youth fitness camps, and obviously in our off-air chat you mentioned you have a bit of work with adults as well. How did the youth stuff come about?
Well, so that came from internship. So interned at Hampshire Cricket Club, and naturally, like every young intern, I wanted to be the first team sports scientist, and be working with the super elite athletes. And then on my first day, the guy running my internship said, "Right, you're taking the under 12 session," which was, initially at first I was like, "Oh, that's not what I want to be doing. I want to be working with the senior athletes." And then within 1 hour of leading that session, I absolutely loved it. I saw development within the space of an hour. I found myself engaged with the kids, and the kids engaged with the session, and so that really sparked the sort of the fire for youth development really early within sort of the S&C career, and then just went from there. And then I guess another side of it, I was an extremely late maturer, and I thought, oh, this could have helped me, so maybe I can help someone else.
Yeah, that's nice. I like that. And I know it's a phrase that gets bandied about a lot in strength and conditioning, and some people don't necessarily agree with it. But if you feel like you've got a philosophy when it comes to strength and conditioning, firstly, what is that philosophy? And does that philosophy change at all when you're working with younger children?
I guess a general philosophy would be helping to provide athletes with the physical qualities or attributes that they need to succeed in their sport. As a whole, I guess that's kind of the job, right? That would probably be an overarching philosophy. With kids, I kind of, if a parent's asking me, what is it that you do? Again, help provide them with the physical side of their sport that hopefully can help their development to them, ultimately achieve their goals, their dreams in the future, really. And then I guess the only real difference between sort of an athlete or a younger kid is you're looking more at development rather than performance, where you would be on more the athlete side and preparing for a specific event or whatnot. But yeah.
And if we're talking about the differences in, for example, I suppose, just to use the words you've used, a development program versus a performance program. Obviously, every parent and every school likes to call kids elite just because it's on a jumper or a t-shirt. But what would those programs, or how might those programs look different, if you will?
So the elite, the athlete side of things, shall we say, is going to be very sort of performance based in terms of sort of strength and speed and more directional speed work, and what you would consider probably a traditional strength and conditioning program, whereas the youth development is, or the development program is more, for me anyway, more about learning, being able to control the body and learning how to do the things that are going to help you do the things down the line, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and it taps into what myself and Kelvin Giles were speaking about on the last podcast, where he said you're going to have stuff that's general, and it looks absolutely nothing like the sport. Stuff that's sport related, so I suppose in that sphere of looking kind of like the sport, but maybe not exactly the nuances of the technical skill. And then you'll have the sport specific. And something you mentioned is that the next phase will always be, the success of the next phase will always be determined by how much of the foundation you built with the previous phase. So that makes a lot of sense. Again, not a question that I necessarily planned, but just in hearing you speak there, that's almost how I would describe the similarities and differences between something like a physical education curriculum versus strength and conditioning. There's definitely going to be similar skills in both, but that for me conceptualizes that quite nicely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, exactly that. Yeah, you're learning or you're performing, and there is a difference between them. Absolutely.
And in one of the things that I've noticed on your social media, which I've quite enjoyed watching, is your use of stuff like obstacle courses, or I suppose maybe a poor person's parkour, if I may say. How do you go about from, for example, right, this is how I'm going to inject fun into the session, but actually this is what I'm looking to get out of this obstacle course. So how do you design your obstacle courses?
Yeah, so there definitely is always an outcome that I'm looking to achieve, and that might even just be something like intensity, like of movement or something. It might not be anything as specific as sort of speed or agility in them, but there's always an outcome. It's normally movement based, and trying to link athletic skills is kind of something that I think about when we're doing the obstacle course. In fact, actually, just sort of go back on myself there and sort of restart. The point of the obstacle course for me is, I think of it in my head of like it's an athletic development course, shall we say, rather than an obstacle course, and it's replacing a little bit of the park and playing in the park and running and jumping and climbing and crawling and rolling, and being able to link all of those things together, which for me is that's really what athleticism is. It's all well and good to be able to do a counter movement jump on the spot and jump up really well and land perfectly, which is obviously something we're going to work on. But actually, how are you going to implement that into doing it into sport? And they practice it in their sports, but I think a lot of young kids, they miss out on, I'm sure you and I spent lots of time in the park jumping off stuff and landing rolls and just practicing and trying cool things. So yeah, that's kind of where they sit quite a lot of the time, is giving that sort of side of things and allowing kids to express themselves. But there will be some physical challenge in something, like they have to challenge themselves to jump high, jump onto a box, or can they be creative in their rolling? Can they complete it quickly, or can they complete it perfectly? And maybe we're working more on a balance coordination side of things, or if we're going quick, it's how quickly can they get from movement to movement going around. Does that, I hope that kind of
it does.
Yeah,
it does. And it's funny because I think one of the things we don't really do in traditional strength and conditioning settings is we don't focus enough on, like you said, those transition movements. It's very easy to get strong in a sort of, I don't mean isolated in the sense of machine work, but isolated in the sense of let's take a hip hinge and a deadlift. But for example, I remember observing a netball session where the teacher wanted these pupils to jump, so basically hinge at the hips, leave the floor, rotate in the air, catch the ball, land on one leg and offload it to a partner, which as a strength and conditioning coach, when you break down all...
Sorry, mate. No. Might be back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, got you.
Right. Apologies, guys. I'm going to hope that I don't have to edit that out. But we were just talking about combining different movement skills, and that is what we see in sport. It's very easy, for example, to teach someone a trap bar deadlift and then just push the weight up and up and up. But realistically, and obviously there's a place for that, building strength, but it's going to be those ability to transition between movements that is probably going to define athleticism. So I really like how you're plugging the gap there, because I don't think us as strength and conditioning coaches pay enough attention to transitions between movements, because we're so focused on just adding load to the bar.
Definitely adding load or our jumps. We might do, a triple hop, which is obviously a fantastic, exercise, fantastic plyometric exercise. But let's put that with a run. Let's put that with a jump or a shuffle or a change of direction. That's really where it's going to, embed into their sporting game and career, rather than just being really good at a triple hop.
Yeah, and we were chatting about it off air in terms of stuff that, for example, looks sport specific, and actually the stuff that goes before it won't necessarily look like the exact sport. I mean, I posted yesterday about, for example, teaching the triple jump, and that you might start by getting a kid to hop left leg to left leg, and then left to right, and then right to 2 feet. It doesn't have to look exactly like the sport, but if the kids can't do the first bit, and then you're just trying to get them to do a run up and go through those 3 phases, then you just got no chance.
Definitely, yeah. We spoke around providing the physical qualities and providing the skill to be able to do the end point, and that's exactly what you're saying there. Yeah, what a great example with the triple jump as well, because it is 3 different movements, isn't it, into one pattern. Definitely.
And when it comes to your session design, how then do you, I know you do a bit of work with Southampton girls. How does your session design differ much when you're dealing with your youth fitness camps versus in an academy setting like that?
Yeah, fundamentally they're going to be completely different. Being that, if nothing else, the work we do with the girls at Saints, we tend to get 20 minutes, and the youth camps can be anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. So that's we're not going to be able to work on speed for an hour and a half very successfully, whereas we could do that within a 20-minute session with the girls. So that's one massive difference on there. I'd say the academy side of things with the girls, we'd work on 1, maybe 2 qualities within that time frame within, and that's probably 1 really. Whereas on the youth camps, I might work up to 4 within a session, and it's more of a, we've got a lot more time to be able to do things. You can break it down into parts. You've also got with obviously Southampton, we follow a periodized plan of what we're going to work on throughout the year or throughout the stage that they are within their within the season or wherever that is. Because I've got the same, I know the players who are going to be there every week are going to be the same, and we can build on something we worked on last week or regress it or progress it as we need to. Whereas within 6 weeks, doing 2 sessions a week of the youth camps, I could literally have a case where I never have the same group, even the same persons within the group, session after session. So it might be that we have to, really strip something back or progress something on within those sessions. So the design of the youth camps is pretty simple. We'll do some form of sort of movement-based warm-up, which for me really is a screen, so I can just see and get an idea of who's in the session, what their abilities are. So I think one of the posts that we chatted on was another obstacle course, and it was more of a movement-based ones. They did forward rolls, and they did some sort of lower level jumps. It wasn't a really sort of high intensity. I could just get an idea of what do these kids look like. We might have a little break and just literally, right, let's see you do a couple of squats, guys, and see what they can do. And I just get an idea of the cohort that I've got within that group. Then we would move on to more of either sort of speed, change of direction, and agility sort of base session, where I would go through sort of closed, more controlled drills, if you want. I don't really like the term drills, but they are drills. So as simple as an A skip or whatever it may be through there, and then we would look to open that up a bit into some sort of closed running if we're saying speed, let's use speed for the example. So we might do some closed sprinting or like a dribble bleed sprint or something like that. And then we'd go into a game or a race or a chase, which would involve some form of some high speed running in there. After that portion of the session, we'd move into more of a strength-based session. So you say we've got 10 for the warm-up, 20 for a bit of speed. We'll go 20 for some strength work. And then by the end of doing that, we would then go into more of a games-based, kind of bringing it all together. That might be your bulldog or a game like that towards the end. Whereas on the Saints side of things, we would have a small amount of time doing some closed work, going into a bit more of an expansive open game or activity, whatever that would be. I guess that's the main differences between them.
Nice. And just on the subject of reverse engineering the obstacle courses then, how do you go from, for example, rather than what a lot of people do, which is, for example, they might see your obstacle course post and think, right, great, let me just copy that. How do you go from, I want to get this out of it, and therefore I need to put these kind of things in place with that course?
That's a good question. Obviously there's going to be a theme sort of to the course and reverse engineer back as you say. If it's the one I mentioned earlier with the movement, I'm going to go, right, I want to have some form of a roll in there. I want to have a crawl. I want to have a climb. I want to have a jump. And then I will gradually, I will build what I perceive the course to be in my mind and set it out, lay it out, because it's ready just logistically. But then I will take them through step by step after I've got an awareness of what they might do. So if the first thing's 2 mats on the floor and we're going to roll across them and no one can do a roll, then I'm probably going to work on a roll for a bit first before we then build that into the course. Then I'd kind of leave that, go onto the jump area, and they would jump. Most kids can jump, right? But if they can't, we might again pop out, go back in, and then work through like that. Is that kind of the theme?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for example, you might have been at the CPD event as well, but I don't think we'd touch base at this point. But when James Baker ran a parkour CPD as part of Untitled Chapter, were you there for that one?
Yeah, I was there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, James Baker was saying that by having mats X amount of distance apart, you're going to encourage a bit more of a leap.
Of course.
Whereas, for example, you might have some kind of pommel horse against the wall, so you can encourage. The technical term from parkour evades me, but you basically end up putting one hand on the vault and sort of springing off the wall and just trying to design the environment as such that you're going to promote the use of these movement skills, as well as maybe a little bit of deliberate practice in there as well.
So that Charles Champion, the parkour course, is why I do those obstacle courses. Like literally that you're saying there, that's where the idea stemmed from, and I just don't have quite as cool kit as James sort of had available. And that's where that linking movements came from as well. That was quite a big conversation me and him had about the guys who he perceived to be more athletic within there, or the guys who could link the movements between sprinting and the pommel horse better than the guys who couldn't. They would, no hesitation, they would be smooth through there. And then exactly as you're saying, if I want a kid to sprint as part of the obstacle course, we will have a long area with nothing in between it, and they have to get from cone to cone. But if we want to focus on something where they jump high, the constraint of the obstacle will be something they have to, it's pretty simple, but they have to jump up and over it. If we want them to jump long, it's a longer gap which they have to try and jump over, exactly as you're saying there.
Yeah, and I suppose it links back to our previous point that we were discussing off air, and the sense that as strength and conditioning coaches, we almost don't realize we speak our own languages, that other people's interpretation of the definitions might not be the same as ours. So we were saying about off air about being a good mover and whether that looks different to, say, a sports coach versus a strength and conditioning coach versus a PE teacher, as an example. So going back to what we were saying about, or what you were saying about using the obstacle course as a screen, as a coach, would we prefer to be given the athlete who, I don't know, in a closed environment, they can squat well, they can hip hinge, They can, I don't know, hold a push-up position plank, or would we prefer that kid who we show the obstacle course to with all of those different skills, and they're just, linking the movements effortlessly without necessarily being told, this is how you do a squat, this is how you bend at the hips.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, really, I mean, I would be more biased towards the guy who's smashing the obstacle course. Even as an S&C coach, I'd like to think we could coach those other movements maybe specific for the gym. But we said, didn't we, if someone, what is that good mover? Is it someone who links those movements, or is it, does being able to squat, hinge, lunge, does that make you a good mover? But then those movements probably don't occur in the sport. So is that a good mover in the sport? Where's that sort of merging within there? And an obstacle course can be a good way of maybe highlighting some of those things and how they can link the movements together. And for us, I still, if someone can squat and lunge and hinge well, I'm like, yeah, they're a great mover. Like, they're a really, really good mover. But a football coach is that plays absolutely no part of their perception of a good mover. A good mover for them is maybe someone who's fluid and can, quickly change direction around an athlete, which is also would be a perception of mine of a good mover. But that led us to the sort of, we were speaking about deceleration and how, within our sessions, we were getting the girls to sprint, stop in that athlete position. And I'm like, yeah, they're stopping. They're really good athlete position. They look like they're ready to go. Again, in my opinion, good movers. And then the football coach comes up and says, why are they stopping like that? That's not how they're going to stop on a football pitch. So yeah, I guess we've, trying to get a perception of what the football coach's good mover is, maybe, explaining what we think a perception of a good mover is, and getting something in the middle and how that can maybe become an actual good mover.
Yeah, and it's an interesting discussion because another thing I think the obstacle courses are useful for, and I've certainly made this mistake before, where in strength and conditioning circles, you like to say, it's great to coach, say, a dancer or a gymnast because they just get it. But for example, you'll teach them a squat and it'll take seconds. You'll teach them a hip hinge in seconds. Obviously, those things are easier to learn if you've got the sort of reserve of movement skills to do, I don't know, a handspring or a backflip. But then you'll put them in a ball sport and you think, well, they're a good mover. They'll be able to do this. But then they can't catch because they can't perceive what's going on around them in the environment. And that's why I like the obstacle courses, because it kind of makes you think, is it a chicken and egg scenario where, for example, they can squat, hinge, push and pull or whatever because they're a good mover, or are they a good mover because they can squat, hinge, push and pull?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have the answer for that one at all, but as you say, chicken and egg scenario, does the squat, hinge, push, pull make them good on the field, or is that a tool to get them strong to help them build the qualities for the field? I guess that's maybe a question you could ask around that as well.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot, and I think it's the difficulty in working with youth athletes, is something I've experienced, is that it's very easy to get youth athletes strong, and because there's a low training age, strength carries over to power better in athletes who do have that lower training age, which by default is going to be people who've been alive for a lot less a period of time. But there then becomes a sort of trade-off where that is no longer continuing to enhance their abilities on the field, which is where it becomes difficult, because you're like, yeah, strength is very useful up to a certain point, and then you've got people who can squat, lunge, hinge, push, pull, and they can put up some pretty good numbers, but then you're like, do I see this in their sport?
Yeah, definitely. I was having a little, when I was thinking about what we would talk about on here, I was thinking, are we, we for me anyway, when I'm teaching a kid to squat, let's use the squat for example, I will come up with like really cool, which I consider them cool, fun methods and ways to try and help them squat using loads of different constraints or equipment or items, and they're doing loads of different variety. There's loads of different variety of movement, and then we see this squat. Oh, they've learned to squat. I put a goblet in their hand, and is it almost like we go, right, stop. That's it. Right, you're a goblet squatter now, and I'm going to get you really strong at the goblet squat, and you're a goblet squatter until you're a front squatter, and then you front squat, and then you're a back squatter, and then you're an over, you know, however far that goes up the chain, and then, you know, is that really what we want to just be chasing with them, or do we want to keep that variety of movement, and that, as we've sort of said about the complexity of movement within it, and how do we go about that, and is that going to be better for their strength? Potentially, well, I mean, you know, strength as a whole, obviously the loaded route potentially is going to be the better one for that in the long run. But, you know, are we restricting their capacity of movement to keep increasing, and their I guess even their creativity? If we've just gone bang, that's you now, you're doing that. That's something I question, you know, quite a lot myself, because I've definitely been guilty of doing that as well. I mean, you're a goblet squatter now, we get you strong in there. I don't know what I don't know what your thoughts are kind of on that, and you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've 100% been guilty of that before, and I also think that in strength and conditioning circles, as we've sort of said, it's like, right, you've got to earn the right to progress, and it's almost like, well, because you've earned that right now, you don't do anything else because you're good enough for us to load it. It's almost like, yeah, we can do all that complexity stuff, but it's almost like, oh, really, that's just the fluff. We really need to get you to the meat and potatoes, which is loading it, which may be the case, may not be the case. Something I have had success with, and I do quite enjoy, is pairing the loaded version of the movement, so something like a goblet squat, or a personal favorite of mine with young athletes is goblet squat, so dumbbell, 2 points of contact against the chest, and then pop a glass of water on the top, because now we're working tempo and control, but they just think, right, let's not get soaked by the water. But then pair that with, I don't know whether you've seen Gold Medal Bodies, which I'd recommend anyone checking out, which is basically like a calisthenics program, but they use a movement called the Frogger or a movement called the Monkey. The Frogger is basically a traveling squat, which can then get turned into a tuck handstand into a squat. The Monkey is you're starting off in a squat position, and it's going to be difficult for me to describe for those listening on audio, but the coaching cue I give is like you're a lazy driver. So you've got your hands going on the floor, your right one comes over your left one, and then the right lands 1, left lands 2, and then the right foot will land 3, left foot will land 4. So trying to improve the sort of, I suppose, the breadth and the depth of their movement quality, and once it looks good enough, the quantity as well, without waffling too much. If anyone's ever come across, the name eludes me, but if we look at movement, this mind's going blanket, but you've got fluctuators and attractors. So attractors are the same things in the movement that are going to be the same regardless of whether you're goblet squatting, back squatting, doing the Monkey, doing the Frogger. And then you've got fluctuators, which are the things that change. And you think, would I rather an athlete who is very good at a lot of the variations, or an athlete who's exceptional at back squatting, but I don't know, you turn it into a squat with rotation in a bodyweight movement, and their mind is just exploded because they can't do it. And I'd probably say I'd much rather the athlete who can do a lot of things very well than is so specialized all they can do is back squat. Like, we argue all the time against early specialization when it comes to us looking at other sports, yet we think, right, you've got to a level where you can back squat, so guess what, you're back squatting for the next 3 years.
Do you know, that was literally, I was having a walk this morning, and it was literally what I was thinking. It was the first time it's ever popped into my head, just reflecting on this. I was thinking, are we actually maybe being potentially of early specializing within, you know, we talk about non-specializing, late specialization, and that we see ourselves as, I see myself as strength conditioning is part of reducing that early specialization, but then are we maybe guilty of doing it, like you say, within our own sessions, by putting them, you know, in a back squat and then they're a back squatter? And just to go on with what you're saying as well, I always think in extreme examples, but I was thinking of Eddie Hall, right? He's pretty good at deadlifting, right? But I don't want to see him turn and chase after a defender. So yeah, I think there's definitely some, you know, there's an argument that we want to keep that complexity within there, and that the variety of the movement is really important. A little example of how I've been trying to avoid someone just being a goblet squatter recently. I was, you know, just a girl I was working with yesterday, she's 12, and her gym-based program, see her a couple of times a week. One of them is just in the gym, and on squats, she's moves unbelievably. Like, you know, she's on a goblet squat at the moment as her main loaded exercise. But we did one set of that, and then we did an overhead squat as set 2, and we did a squat where she had to pick something up and put it over her head and go around to the other side and put it back on the floor again before she could stand up. And yeah, I think that's a way that you can still get that, you know, the load through them, because that's important, right? We want to get them strong, but also provide that, you know, the complexity and the variety within the session. It doesn't just have to be 3 sets of 10 or whatever, you know, rep range goblet squats.
Yeah, well, I mean, that also touches across along another movement principle, which you may or may not have heard of. It comes from a guy called Bernstein, who's big in the movement science literature, but he talks about repetition without repetition. One of the ways he mentions it is if you literally just have an athlete watch another athlete move, and it kind of, the brain almost counts it as a repetition for the athlete who is watching, as long as they know what they're watching for. But also with the squatting variations, they're still getting, in that example, 4 sets of squatting movements. And in a podcast by Rob Anderson the other day, he was talking about mentoring younger coaches, and they'd programmed something like, I don't know, 3 sets of 10 squats, and then a couple of weeks later 3 sets of 8, then 3 sets of 6. And his critique on that was, well done, you've given them less practice of a movement that they need practice of. Which is weird, because if we were talking about working with performance athletes or adult athletes, in most strength and conditioning textbooks, you'd be like, okay, volume's gone down, intensity comes out, that looks good. But it's kind of like with youth athletes, we kind of need to rewrite the rule book a little bit.
Yeah, and just using that example, are they really going to be lifting enough of a heavier weight at that 3-6 when they're young as well? I think you could put that in there. The Bernstein and the dynamic systems theory, constraints-led approach, I love it, but I don't think I'm delving down the rabbit hole, but I'm not there in my framework to probably be able to give a really good informed opinion on it. But it's certainly, I love that repetition about repetition, and as you've maybe seen from the social media side of things, you know, the constraints-led approach to learning is, I'm all over it. You know, that's my number one approach, if you will, to learning. And yeah, just absolutely love delving into that stuff and getting absolutely brain fried by trying to read it all. But it's really good.
I think the issue with both of those extremes, so for example, right, let's just get them really, really strong, because we know from the literature, especially for younger athletes or athletes with a lower training age, it'll transfer to so many qualities. So if we've got that on one extreme, then on the other extreme, we're like, right, we want to expose them to several different variations of the same movement pattern. I think the difficulty is when you go too far one way or the other, because like you said, we're not trying to create the next Eddie Hall, but then equally, there's some stuff which I see on social media, and I'm like, now this just looks like chaos. I can't see the logic behind it. And equally, if you wanted to just do variety for variety's sake, you could easily be there all day. I mean, Howard Green spoke about the Charter Champion Conference. You know, why is it this variation for this athlete at this stage of their training cycle, at this stage of their maturation in this session, based on what they've done previously? And otherwise, if you do want to go down the variety route, then you can literally make it variety for variety's sake, which you've got to know when enough is enough, basically.
Definitely. I think we're going to speak about it maybe in a little bit on the, you know, the term on fun as well. But yeah, there's got to be a purpose behind the variety. It can't just be circus tricks and you know just doing it for the sake of it. Yeah.
And another thing, I mean, I suppose we've kind of touched upon it already, but one of the thought process in my head is that if improving strength at a pre-pubertal age is primarily due to improvements in coordination, then the question I planned for you was, are we chasing the wrong rabbit by thinking, right, looks good, load it, and let's just keep adding load to it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, I don't think I have a definitive answer to it, but yeah, I think I worry, do we put the kids, are we putting them, like I said, are we pressing that stop, and you're a goblet squatter now, and are we putting them into a box which is going to just progress one side of things, where we may get a lot more of, you know, we might get progressions within our coordination and balance and the ability to control our body by providing that more variety rather than which we know is good for a prepubescent child, rather than just hitting the strength, which may be better left for, once they've gone through that growth spurt, because who knows what's going to happen in that spurt as well. We might have to spend that time re-educating them how to perform these movements, and it's not going to be a waste, definitely not. They're going to have got some neural strength, but I'm thinking if they've been exposed to more variety of the movement and hopefully really been able to learn that pattern, that might then stay as they go through that growth spurt and through their growth, till we can get them to a position where we are happy. Right now, let's load them, let's get them really relatively strong and start moving towards that performance side of things.
Yeah, and although I've not jotted this question down, another thought that I had. So I remember chatting with another coach, and in terms of going into the all-girls school I worked in, I was like, right, if we've only got 45 minutes, are we better off, especially for those who are pre-puberty, who aren't going to have the hormonal profile to increase muscle mass, which we know is limited in females anyway? Are we better off just going for unilateral variations, because it's going to potentially improve coordination, enhance the stabilization muscles, and then once they've developed that, maybe it's going to be easier to have the strength and the movement foundation to then use the bilateral work to go for pure force production? Because I think a lot of times we think, oh, well, we pluck a percentage out of thin air, and like, well, the textbook says 80% is enough to get stronger. But then you're like, yeah, but these kids have no idea what heavy is, because they don't have the experience of lifting weights. So they've got nothing to contextualize what 80% actually is. Yeah,
that's a really, really good point. I do like the unilateral training with the prepubescence as well. Is great, and you make a good point. If you're going to get strong for there, it's definitely going to help getting stronger on the bilateral later on. No, really good point on there. It's interesting. When you say about that limited time space, I think it's something we touched on a little bit. Rewind 5 years ago, and if you said to me, you've got 45 minutes with these kids, I'd be like, right, here we go. Squats, lunges, hinge, push, pull. Let's just get them really, really strong. But, now if you're saying, I've got 45 minutes with these kids once a week for the session, we're going to focus a lot more on our running based activities and speed, change of direction. But before we then, probably batch on a bit of strength towards the end of it, which is a real interesting shift in mindset. I think maybe that comes with just experience, doesn't it? I think most young coaches probably would go down the same route. They want to just, right, strength is the answer, just get them as strong as possible in that time. But then, we learn that there's so much more involved in athletic development and long-term athletic development as well, rather than just being good at and ridiculously strong at those key movements.
I think it's also easy to forget what strength might look like for a younger athlete. Like, strength is just the ability to produce force against a resistance. It doesn't have to be like, if you've got a game I sometimes play with, for example, my year sevens, is a game stolen from Shane Fitzgibbon of rocket tag. Basically, stuck in the mud. If you get stuck, you sit in deep squat, and then you blast off like a rocket when you've been freed. Now, doing a sort of arse to grass squat to a maximal jump for a kid, like, many of them will only leave the ground just a little bit. But if that's maximal, that's still probably strength training, because they're not that strong relative to their body weight. Whereas, going back to your Eddie Hall example, if you got one of the world's best deadlifters or squatters to jump with their own body weight maximally, like, is that going to be strength training for someone who, can squat 250 odd kilos for 8 reps? Probably not.
Definitely not. But yeah, I mean, jumps and body weight, training for kids is fantastic, isn't it? There's so many returns that you can get from just that alone, and you can manipulate that in multiple different ways, with tempo and the variety or the variation of what you're doing of that specific movement, and then put it into a jump, etc. is, it's a great way that it's going to work on strength outside of the gym, that you can put into a session, like you're saying. And I'm stealing that game.
And you also mentioned, for example, we as strength and conditioning coaches think, right, we've got to cover all these bases, right? I need my strength work in there, I need my running base activity work in there, without thinking that actually the lower the training age, the more bases that will inadvertently or deliberately be covered just by doing less anyway. And then when we need to, for example, as training age develops, then we might need to think, right, I need to bolt that onto somewhere. We need to do a bit of this.
Yeah, definitely, completely agree.
And in terms of, just to sort of cycle back to the obstacle course design, with you obviously come across different athletes, populations, both with your work with Southampton Girls, and we were talking off air about how you might, for example, have within the same group a child who perhaps isn't the sportiest at one of your fitness camps versus, say, young athletes who are national champions in their sport. How do you, and this is something I'm working on within my PE lessons, but how do you differentiate for those two athletes within the same group session?
Yeah, so I'll go the obstacle course first, and then I'll go within the group session sort of on a second on that. So the obstacle course I would probably always direct towards the lower end of the continuum, because as much as, like I said, they are looking to have a physical output out from, they're also fun and an engagement side of things for the group. They tend, kids tend to love them as they come. They're always the highlight of any sort of feedback form that we do. And I think the more advanced, child will just naturally make it harder. They'll just approach it in a different way. They'll do it faster, or they'll jump higher, or they'll try a different skill, to the kid who's not got as much experience. But if they're both able to complete the course as sort of a minimum, they can kind of do it to their own ability. And I guess that goes down that sort of the Bernstein we were talking about as well, and the set the task and then they can create it from there. But yeah, so that's how I kind of do the obstacle course side of things. They encourage the more able child to really push on, and I just say just do cool stuff, like just show me something cool, and go for that. Then within the session, I will, very simple, in a race, I'll just try and pair up ones who I think are gonna, be able to compete, or I might just do like a staggered race I've done before when the kid is just losing all the time and they're no longer working on speed, because after the first 2 meters they know they've lost and they're just jogging it through. I'll give them the advantage, and then sometimes that takes the conversation to have with both ends of that continuum, because the kid who's winning every race suddenly hates it that they're now at the back and they're starting behind. But the kid, I also don't want to embarrass the kid at the front and make them feel put off that I'm not winning. So I'll have a conversation with them and go, look, to this kid I want to even it up and give everyone a chance, and to this kid I want you to push on, and let's see if you can beat them from there. They've had more experience in this, or give them a reason why they're doing it, and try and level out the session there. If it's on a strength side of things, I'll just progress the other one on, and the other one, the other child will be doing a regression of the exercise.
Yeah, nice. And where my thinking's currently at, because it's funny with differentiation, I find that like kids aren't as stupid as some people think they are. Like, for example, I've had sessions where I might have done a similar thing and a kid might be like, oh, is it because this person's rubbish? And you'd be like, no. And then you think, right, if I differentiate well enough, you won't even realize what I've done. So in your example, I might have the kid who's more athletic turn around and face the other way as well as a head start. Or for example, I'll always pre-select teams. I'll condition it. Like I had a year 7 football lesson the other day, and the high ability team only had 2 touches and couldn't tackle, whereas the low ability team could tackle, had unlimited touches. And it's funny because one of the kids from the high ability team was like, "Sir, this isn't fair." And I was like, "Look at the teams blatantly aren't fair, but you're telling me my conditions aren't fair." Whereas another kid was like, "No, he's trying to challenge us." And it's interesting because, as you said, it just gives you those opportunities to have those conversations, whether it's about growth mindset, whether it's about, look, all I want is 100% effort. And, maybe it is deliberately unfair, but, without being too adult on young children, like that's life.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a lot easier though when you're dealing with the kid who's, in brackets, better, because you can really explain, they'll pretty much most of the time embrace the challenge and then want to try and show you. I think it's it's sometimes harder approaching the kid who's not as developed, and sort of explaining to them. And like you say, that's where you can go with that growth mindset is a good example. But but then sometimes they just get the chance to win, and then they love that as well, which is awesome.
Oh yeah, and I think, as we were saying earlier with the strength versus coordination side of things, I think any extremes are dangerous. Like when we say, kids, it isn't all about winning. Now, I agree, but then let's not also forget that winning is fun. Like, we need to create an environment where that kid, for example, who isn't as naturally gifted or doesn't have those athletic skills, has still got just as much chance of winning as the kid who is more athletic. Because if we go down the traditional sport route, which I've mentioned in previous podcasts, then the kids who've been exposed to traditional sport will obviously have more of a leg up. Now, I think there's a time and a place for that, but in our sessions where we're in control of what we deliver, we need to also be aware of the fact that conditions can level the playing field. Being pre-selective of our teams can level up the playing field, even, as you said, the equipment, the constraints. If we can give both teams a chance of winning where it's still competitive, where the less able child has to try, the more able child still has to try, then we know we're doing something right.
Definitely, and it actually takes me back to something which I meant to say right at the start in the why I do what I do section. I think the one thing with the athletic development camps is that I've been really sort of passionate on is that they're an introduction to this is quite literally most kids' first ever fitness session, shall we say, outside of maybe what they've done in school. And I want them to have a really positive relationship with exercise and fitness. I think if I'm sure you're the same, working with kids, you're naive to think that every kid you're going to work with is going to become a professional athlete. It may well be that none of them do. So it's about building that positive relationship with fitness, that it can be fun. It doesn't just have to be doing a slog around a field for 12 minutes in a Cooper run or something. It can be having a race is you're working on fitness, and then building that positive relationship, making a strength movement fun. Oh, actually, this isn't too bad on there. So I think that's another key part, and there's nothing worse than that kid who's just losing and just looks miserable. And I'm like, I don't want that in my session. I want them to enjoy it and have some chance at winning. And if that means manipulating the game, as we're saying, I'll definitely do that.
Yeah, and like I said, fitness comes in so many different guises. Like just using the rocket tag example, one of my fitness lessons the other day, I pre-selected teams as sort of low ability, middle ability, high ability. And for the low ability, if they caught someone and they didn't get free within 5 seconds, then that person joined the team. Whereas for the high ability, obviously that didn't happen because they were more athletic. Now all of a sudden the low ability team is getting more and more success because they're catching more and more people and they've got a bigger team to work with. Whereas the high ability have to run quicker to tag people. And it's like, right, you've differentiated it. They don't realize actually the kids who aren't as athletic are still breathing heavily because you've set the conditions up right. If I'd have said, right, let's do a bleed test, those kids would be lost before we'd even got onto any sort of productive conversation.
Definitely, yeah.
And just finally, I know you quite like using constraints-based stuff and external cues. Could you talk maybe about your sort of journey towards that, and I suppose some of the mistakes you've made in coming to that realization?
Yeah, definitely. I was pretty fortunate that one of my mentors early doors was very external cue based anyway, and put me down the Nick Winkelman line, and I just really liked his stuff, so it stuck with me anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think back to some of my early sessions when I was out on my own, and yes, knees out, chest up, feet flat, internal cues, and then you come back the next week and it's not learned, and you're revisiting them again, and you're saying the same thing, and not only is it not sticking, it's also becoming monotonous and a little bit boring on that. So then I was like, right, this isn't really working, is it? So go down the line of tried external cues. Instead of saying knees out, say, right, create a tunnel for your friend to crawl under as you do a squat, and then that tends to stick the next week maybe a little bit more, and you see that progress sort of through there. So I guess really it's just trial and error, and something wasn't working, something does work. And then with one sort of two different cohorts, different age groups, I just reflected, like, what did I do with, and I was looking and I'm thinking they're moving better than them. And I was like, why is that kind of happened? And I just reflected on what they were doing. And I just noticed with one group, we were doing like what I call, a football push away squat, where they squat and they push the ball away. And they were doing things like similar to your water on the goblet. They were balancing cones on the head, going up and down. And the other group, I didn't even know why I didn't do it. I just hadn't programmed that. They were just doing, body weight air squats. And then I looked at them, a good couple of months later, and I was like, yeah, there must be some reason, because why? Obviously there could be loads of other reasons, but for a whole cohort, me thinking these are really good, these aren't. What is it? Just went back through the programming, and just, I guess, probably developed the bias towards the external cueing. But it's also got pretty good literature behind it as well. And I find so I find it works. But then I just find, especially with kids, they just engage with it more, using their imagination. It's making it more fun. And yeah, that's probably why, in a roundabout way.
Yeah, and I think I've seen you use some of Simon Brundish's stuff in terms of his superheroes. And I'm sure that probably works quite well as well, rather than getting a kid to lunge. Now all of a sudden creating a story off the back of it.
I love the superhero work. It's so good. It really sparks that imagination. And most of the time I catch myself now going, right, we're going to do some Ironmans instead of do some squats, and it's better. And I tell you, from my experience, the program works really well as well. It does that. And yeah, I mean, I was doing a warm up yesterday, and just as one little part of it, just working between a couple of cones, I was like, right, I just want you to do your superheroes on the move. Let's see what you come up with. And you've just got these cool, like, really well performed, like squat, like then a sideways squat, and then a really good lunge, but with the noises and everything going on as well. It's really good. Engagement's up, good quality movement. They're excellent.
And it's funny because even with some of the younger kids that I've worked with, I don't know why, but if I was a kid, I'd be like, you're just disguising it, but it's still the same thing. But you call some of the squat, oh, I've got a squat. But, you give it a fancy name. Maybe you're making a few noises. Maybe you turn up the music. And all of a sudden, you've given them a completely different environment to do exactly the same thing. And they love it.
Definitely. There's another thing I was thinking about is, if when I'm coaching kids, I like to try and put my mindset in the frame of the kid. And being that I'm probably not that mature, it's quite easy for me, right? So I put myself in that like 12-year-old's headspace, and I'm like, well, if I was to have thought this was boring at 12, I probably wouldn't have done it very well. But if I'm thinking this is going to be fun, then I'm probably going to try and do it a little bit more. And that's another reason for that external constraint space. I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say bodyweight squats with your hands out in front of you, right? It's pretty boring, right? It's not as much as we love it as S&C coaches. It's not the most fun thing in the world to do. But if you've got a ball between your arms which you have to balance, it makes it a lot more engaging, doesn't it? And
this is why I like using, as I said, the GMB Frogger, GMB Monkey, because now all of a sudden, for example, youth female population, now all of a sudden I've got girls trying to show me their tuck handstand, or for example, a monkey which kind of looks a little bit like a cartwheel. And for example, the other day, in one of my year 8 sessions, as a warm-up, we did just like a cartwheel race. And the intensity there was probably a lot more than if I was like, right, sprint to this line.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that sounds good. I like that.
Yeah, and even from, you saying put yourself in a 12-yard shoes, I always think if you're thinking about behavior management for sessions, like put yourself in a child's shoes, like the amount of times, and I'm guilty for it, but one of my pet peeves as a PE teacher is, I don't know, you're doing basketball and you're trying to speak and someone's just bouncing the ball. But 100%, if you give me a ball and you let me have it in between my hands, I'm going to bounce it and be the person doing it when you're talking. So I just resonated a lot with you saying that.
Yeah, but it is something I keep in mind. Like, I maybe just going off a bit of a tangent on it, but you I remember when I used to play football, there was nothing worse than the coach just talking to me. Do you know what I mean? There was nothing. So I was just wanting to know what to do and then give me an opportunity to do it. And again, that's a big thing I try and apply with kids. I try and be as distinct, like as quick as I can with the demo and the instruction, and then just give them time to work it out and try and play it, and then maybe go around and drop a couple of cues in, but let them learn that way rather than just having loads chucked at them.
Yeah, and it's definitely something I'm trying to improve in my own teaching and coaching. And one of the big things for me, and Lee Taff pointed out superbly in our podcast the other day, in that those precious minutes at the start is where energy is going to be the highest. Even if you've got a group that are potentially a little bit more reluctant than other groups, that is your precious minutes. If you're, for example, stood there being like, right, we're going to wait for the other people to join this session, like, you're just going to lose them already. And if you think, right, the game I've designed is a bit elaborate, but it's fun, but it takes you 3 minutes to explain it, you're just going to lose kids. You need those kind of games where, for example, I saw on your social media the other day about just putting equipment out and letting kids play with it just whilst waiting for people to join in. Like those games where you don't need to explain it. It's like, right, you've sorted a game out. Doesn't matter logistically whether we've got one person, whether we've got 12 people, and that way the game can just develop whilst kids are arriving rather than being like, right, we've got to wait till we've got everyone.
Definitely, I love doing that one. But it's a good way. When kids do arrive in stages, everyone's doing something, and they're if they've made it up, it's probably going to be quite fun for them. I'll always try and make a note of that game as well, and then think, right, how can I use that at another time, and then try and actually bring an aim to it and an outcome as well, which is something I like to do. Yeah, two birds, one stone. Most of my best games are developed by kids.
Absolutely, and again, from a behaviour management point of view, when kids are creating the game and managing it themselves, they'll always umpire better and they'll take control of it versus, if you've set the game up, all of a sudden, if somebody thinks a rule's been broken, they're now coming over to you to be like, oh, well, I thought you said we couldn't do this, or this person's just done that. And it just eliminates all of that. Definitely.
I think there's another example where on my I always like I'm very conscious I like to have an outcome. Obviously I don't like to waste time when you've got you've got such a small amount of time you're going to have with these kids. But if something is looking really good and it's ticking a few boxes, I've let it go for 20 minutes before and just let them do it. And if it might not be the session I've had planned, but if it's getting something out of it, physically, and they're enjoying it, then carry on.
Yeah, something I've been doing of late is, nothing annoys me more than seeing warm-up time wasted by saying take a lap, when I think most kids know how to put one foot in front of the other. Okay, technically might not be the best, but they know how to do that. Whereas, for example, chucking a few skipping ropes out, as you said earlier, with the kids who are better, they're probably going to try and skip faster. You might be able to say, right, can you skip, left leg only, right leg only, slow it down, whatever. Whereas the kids who haven't learned that skill, it's giving them a chance to be exposed to it. But I did it with a group of my year 9s the other day, and they did something which I didn't realise was still a thing, but tied 2 ropes together and swinging the ropes. And then all of a sudden I was like thinking, I only wanted to do this for a minute just to get you warm and just while I set up the first activity. But now you've taken it and now the intent is still there. So I'm like, well, I'm going to let this run a little bit.
Yeah, definitely it goes, and it's just letting kids be kids as well, which I think, in the long run can really build your buy-in to your whole program. If you stop that early and take that element away, I think that could probably be a negative over the long term rather than a positive. And 5 minutes, which could have been worked on something really S&C-y. It hasn't been, but you might have got buy-in for the work that you're going to do later in the session as well.
Yeah, and I've certainly found more creativity comes when you're, lenient's the wrong word, but as you said, if you can see it's being productive, then why not? I remember some of the sessions, and we were talking earlier about how we've sort of tweaked what we've done. I remember it was coming up, like sports day was, I don't know, a month away or so, and I was just pairing up, say, a sort of S&C type standing broad jump with, right, we're just going to do a bit of coordination work for the triple jump, or we're going to do like a med ball throw like your traditional strength and conditioning thing paired with the technical side of a shot put. And the buy-in from those sessions was massive. And it's, maybe I can throw it like this. Maybe all of a sudden they were like throwing the ball over their head. And I'm thinking, well, still getting triple extension, still getting power. And actually, because you come up with it, you're going to take ownership of it. Whereas I don't feel like you get that creativity when you're like, here's a dumbbell, do a goblet squat. Like if you said, how would we progress that? You'd probably get a, blank look and maybe a shrug of the shoulders.
Definitely. I think you mentioned to me, I can't remember if we said it in this or if it was before, but the fun, balancing fun with the productivity. But I think fun is productive, and vice versa. If they're having fun with it, they're going to be a lot more engaged and apply a lot more effort than if it's if it's not fun. Which I think sometimes maybe we're a little bit afraid of that. Afraid of having fun for some reason. I've said it to parents before. They'll say, "How was the session?" I'd be like, "Yeah, the kids had loads of fun," and they'll look at me a bit disappointed, like, "What do you mean they're having fun in fitness?" But that's I think that drives that engagement, and I certainly get a lot more out of it. It can't just be like you said with the variety. I don't think it'd be fun just for fun's sake. There does have to be some output and reason behind it, but yeah, it's a big driver.
Absolutely. And you're kind of in this difficult grey space where you don't want to be seen as sort of glorified babysitting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if we go to traditional strength and conditioning, yeah, we could be like, I don't know, their standing long jump improved. And from our point of view, we're like, I've quote unquote done my job. But then if the kids go back and say to their parents, how did you get on at, Tom's youth fitness camp? No, it's all right. Yeah. Then you're like, well, it doesn't matter. And go back to your previous point about being too keen to stop something, like you said, those warm-up activity games. If we just cut them on the head just because they're like, right, everyone's here now, we're getting started. You're like, well, who's the session for? Is it for my benefit or is it for their benefit?
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. That is a really, really good point. Who is that session for? I think I've definitely been guilty of doing a session which is to tick my boxes of what I want them to get out of it. But yeah, it's about their development, and love that.
Yeah, and like you said, right, even though you have got these boxes to tick, it doesn't have to be ticked in this exact way. If I can still see I'm getting an outcome, then if it's not broke, why fix it?
Definitely love that.
And just in wrapping things up with the last couple of questions. So firstly, if you had one key take home for, I don't know, parents, teachers, coaches listening to this podcast, what would you like it to be?
Good question. I guess don't be afraid of having fun within a session, and you can get the productivity out of there. And I think also if we go back to what we were talking about with the strength work, maybe it doesn't just stop when they're a good mover. You're not the goblet squatter. You can do other varieties within that.
Nice. And this is one I love. If you could observe one coach working with their athletes or indeed children, whatever it be, who would you like to observe and why?
Cool. So, obstacle courses. Jeremy Frisch, I'd love to see him in action. I think that would be awesome. I think he's, obviously I don't know him, but from everything I've seen, unbelievable practitioner. I love all his stuff. Follow that. So yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, and definitely someone I'm going to try and have on the podcast in future, because I'd love, similar to what we've discussed today, because the stuff just, I think, putting myself back in the 12-year-old shoes, as you say, I'd love to do that stuff now. I've seen your videos of joining in with some of the kids' sessions. I think to be able to jump in with Jeremy's sessions with all the equipment they've got, I would love to know, for example, how that looks. I don't know whether I'd say longer term or, that sort of planning, whether it's a unit of work, whether it's session to session, whether it's, as you said, with the amount of equipment he's got, you could easily just say to the kids, look, here's the equipment, go. And I'm sure you'd still get something more productive than what a lot of traditional S&C sessions might look like.
Definitely. I think there was one post he did where he was talking about the difference between just a straight sprint and his sprint through the obstacle course. And yeah, as you say, I think that's you're definitely going to get more out of that obstacle, or more engagement out of the obstacle course on there. Yeah, it's stuff. I'd love to have all that kit, and you talk about having to go at them. Don't be thinking all those courses. I haven't ran through them, a good couple of times before the kids get there. I'm flying through them.
Oh, absolutely. But it's funny how, on that same analogy, sometimes I think I've observed teachers and I see them getting frustrated that kids can't do X drill, but then they'll try and explain it to me, and I'm thinking, like, my head's gone. Like, I don't know, for example, where I'm meant to be, and maybe it's just because I'm not that bright. But I'm thinking, if I'm struggling as someone who's 27 years old, accredited strength and conditioning coach, qualified PE teacher, and you're asking a 12-year-old to do that, like, have you not tried running someone else who doesn't know what they're on about through this session and wondering where you're going wrong?
Definitely, that is nice. I tend to think if a kid can't understand what I want them to do, it's my fault. It's not theirs. There's been a breakdown in my communication or my delivery, rather than, I'm not going to get frustrated and blame the kid. I'll get probably frustrated at myself that they haven't. But that took a long time to be able to realize that.
Yeah, and there's so many examples of where I think we're guilty, and again, sort of going back to the sessions I've observed, where we're guilty of thinking just because we know what it means that somebody else knows what it means. I mean, the other week I did a little warm-up for my football lesson, and I just wanted them to jump for an imaginary header, which works great, or better than expected with year sevens, and I just wanted them to land on a single leg. And I said, right, I want you to kill the movement dead, because I wanted that eccentric strength or that deceleration that we're talking about. So I said, jump up, and we're going to kill the movement dead. Right, 3, 2, 1, jump up. And 3 of the kids just throw themselves on the floor. And I'm like, what are you doing? And they said, you said play dead. And I'm like, no, that's not what I meant.
Yeah, I love that. Without, I don't want to, just real quick snapshot. There's another post I did on the Instagram about when I first had my meeting with an accountant. She told me I was putting stuff on the wrong ledger. And I was like, no idea what a ledger is. And then, if they don't know what you're talking about, then there's no chances there.
But it's funny because I think, ironically, I think it's a real mark of a self-esteem in a child to actually say, I don't know what you're saying, because I mean, I can't remember which book it was that I read it in, but it was in the introduction, and they were talking about, I don't know, going on a tour through the Himalayas or whatever it was. And the tour guide said, have you got any questions? And the author said, well, no, of course we didn't, because that would imply that we'd been listening the whole time. And, kids who actually have the confidence to say, I don't know what you mean, and actually checking for understanding is two very valuable things.
Definitely, because of course they don't want to look like they're not clever as well. Do you know? If they, that they're expected to understand. So yeah, encouraging them to be able to talk. I love that. Yeah.
And penultimately, if you had one recommended resource, it can be a podcast, a book, maybe an app that you're using.
Yeah, I mean, the number one book that I always go for, I always find myself going back to with kids is still Lloyd and Oliver's, strength conditioning for young athletes. I call it the YPD book, but yeah, I always go back to that. And then like I said earlier, anything Jeremy Frisch puts up online, I'm always on that. That's not one, is it? But I've got one.
I'll do. You say as many as you want.
But and get to a charter champion conference as well when it's back, as a conference when we're out of these COVID conditions, because they're so good.
Yeah, and just to chat briefly about it, the one in 2017 is still one of my favourite conferences. I mean, not to knock the UKSCA conferences, but if you're working with kids and you want something practical, you think, right, I want to be able to use something from that conference on Monday morning. I mean, UKSCA is great if you happen to have 30 grand force plates, but if you want something you can actually apply with the kids that you're working with, and as we've said, especially if it's mixed ability groupings and not, I mean, like I said earlier, every child is an elite youth athlete because it's on a hoodie or a jumper. But if you want stuff that's actually practically applicable, Charter Champion is one of the best child-based coaching conferences that I've been to in recent years.
100%. Can't speak highly enough of it. So good.
And finally, how can people reach out to you if they want to have a look at your stuff or have got a question for you?
Mostly on, I've got the Instagram page, which is at @shp_physical prep. Or more than happy on email would be tom@shpfitness.co.uk. I do have Twitter, but I just COVID has just made me, I can't stand Twitter, so I'm just off there at the moment. So Instagram's probably best, or email.
It's one of the reasons why I started a podcast. I mean, why write 140 characters when you can ramble on for an hour and a bit?
yeah, definitely.
Every S&C coach's favorite phrase, it depends. 140 characters is easy to be misinterpreted. Like you say, how do I improve my child's performance? Get stronger. But here's an hour and a half of caveats to that get stronger.
Yeah, I just can't stand it. I find it makes me frustrated, so I'm just not going to do that. Yeah,
understandable. Anyway, Tom, I really appreciate you giving up your time on a Sunday afternoon. So thanks very much for coming on.
Cheers, Todd. Loved it. Hopefully it's been useful. And thank you very much.
We'll catch up soon.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to episode number 36 of the Platform to Perform podcast with today's guest, Tom Smith, and myself, as always, Todd Davidson. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please share it with a coach, a teacher, or an athlete who you think will benefit from it. And if you'd like to find time to leave us a review, that would be very much appreciated. If you want to go one better than that and you want to support the podcast, then why not check out my Patreon, which you can find at www.patreon.com/Todd Davidson P2P coaching. By signing up to my Patreon, you'll have exclusive access to all 30 of my calisthenics kids lessons, which aim to improve strength, confidence, and movement skill in children using bodyweight only training. You'll also have access to all of my strength and conditioning programs that I've released, which include bodyweight size, bodyweight basics, and a host of other conditioning programs. You'll also have access to my exclusive strength and conditioning educational content, including my Technique Tuesday series and all the questions that I've answered via my Patreon for my Patreon subscribers. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll catch you again in the next episode.